Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Saga. I am David Cottingham here. With me, of course, is Hannah Burr. How are you, Hannah?
Doing well. You?
Very good. Very good. Good evening. A little late into the evening for us tonight. But I think like me, you're kind of a night owl, I think.
Little.
Yeah, same here. So this is great that we can all get on here and talk Star Wars. And we, on this episode, are going to be finishing the Thrawn trilogy, the Star Wars canon Thrawn trilogy. Timothy Zahn's third book called Thrawn Treason. This book came out in July of 2019, and it is the completion of this trilogy and this storyline of Thrawn with the Chiss and with Eli, and what we'll talk about a little bit is about the Grisk, which we've talked about in the previous book. So a lot to dive into now. I think the first thing to talk about really is time period. I think we usually try to make sure we understand that this is, if you watched Rebels, Star Wars Rebels, the animated series, there's a point at the end of season 3, and the next time we see Thrawn, which is into season 4, this is when that storyline happens, right? And I think I should have looked this up, but I think it's shortly after actually the second book, Thrawn Alliances. I think that all kind of takes place in that same, because at the end of season 3 is when he gets paired up with Vader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they go to Batu and they deal with that. And I think this is shortly after. And of course, at the end of this, he pops over back into the end of Rebels. And of course, from there, we don't know what happens to Thrawn yet, because the hyperspace is out of the scene with Ezra, and we don't know. So, but in this book, Treason, first and foremost, we always start off with overall thoughts. Hannah, what was your overall thought of this book?
Kind of hurt my brain. I'm not gonna lie. I wanted, and don't get me wrong, that's not a slight on the author. That it is still very well written. Mm-hmm. We still have strong characters. We still see Thrawn in his element, playing his traditional mind games, and being very smart and crafty. But I feel like it got to the point where the mind games almost went a little too far. It got to a point where it was a very strategic story, mm-hmm. and it contrasted so much with Eli's story of what was going on, because he's on a completely different, he's with the Chiss.
Yes.
And so it was almost because Eli's story was simpler, it was a little more enjoyable, because there was so much to try to keep track of with Thrawn's story. Which wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just different, and it's different than the 2 books that were before it.
Yes, very much so.
So, for me, I kind of enjoyed Eli's story a little more than I did Thrawn's. But at the same time, it's just well written, and we continue to learn about this mysterious figure.
Mm-hmm.
What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I think like you, I think it was good. I don't think it was. I dare I say, I feel like it was probably the weakest of the 3
mm-hmm.
of the trilogy, right? And I'm with you. I think what I really loved about the first book was that relationship with Eli and Thrawn, and seeing that grow. And the only reason I feel like I didn't miss him in the second book was because we had Anakin and Vader and Padme, right? So, mm-hmm. But you're right. I think in this book, it really helped that he comes back, and we dive more into the Chiss. And one aspect I did like, we'll talk about the plot a little bit, obviously, without giving it away, but what I did like is we brought in a familiar character we only know from Rogue One, and that is Director Krennic. I remember listening to this in the car and him popping up and like, wow, that's pretty neat. Crossing over that character from Rogue One, and basically the reason why he's in there is he's obviously still overseeing Stardust, because Stardust is not complete yet, right? This is before Rogue One. So he has problems with that project. As you know from Rebels, Thrawn is trying to get his TIE Defender program up and running, and still being funded. So there's a conflict there between the two, and that's where the story kind of takes off from there. So I enjoyed it, but probably not as much as I did the previous two books. So I guess so one other thing I think that was pretty neat to see was we get fully introduced to the Grisk, which are the ultimately some major bad guys that pop up in this book. And as far as I remember, they were talked about in the previous books, but we get kind of a really understanding of who they are, what they're trying to do, and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm not. It's hard. I think it's hard in a novel like this to really fully explain or illustrate just how big of a threat they are. But I feel like they are, but I just didn't get that sense in this novel, and maybe you need to see them more in a live action or animated version to really get their sense. I don't know if you got that at all, but I just I understand that what they are and what they're trying to do. I just not sure they were that strong in this book.
To me, I feel like part of it was, well, if Thrawn's worried about them, then there's
true
for concern, because Thrawn's not worried about a lot of things. I think the other aspect, and it could be that I just misread this, but from my perspective while I was reading this, and I'm going to say as little as possible not to give too much away, it almost sounded like they also had the third sight or second sight.
Yeah, I think they have something like that. Yes,
something like that. They have something that leads, and then something happens that leads you to believe that they might be force sensitive or have that. And if you throw that in with the fact that Thrawn sees them as a threat, then holy crap, Batman.
Yes.
This is not going to be pretty. But I agree with you in that if you don't see it from that angle or don't read it that way, then it is definitely more of a mysterious group. More of a, what more can we learn from them? And who knows, we might see them in the future, with Mandalorian or Ahsoka, with Thrawn coming there. We might get more of the Grisk there. Or we might get it more in literature or comics. So we might get more, but I definitely want to learn more about this species that is so threatening.
Yes.
And I mean, they, based on what we read about them in the book and what we witness them do, I mean, pretty bad.
Yeah. Well, I think that if you do your research on the Grisk right now, I think you actually get more of their story and who they are in the next Thrawn trilogy, which we'll dive into at some point. But the Thrawn Ascendancy books that are out there, I think there's even more appearances of the Grisk in there. So I think that's where a lot of the details comes from. So, like we're saying, I think there's still a shroud of mystery of how truly powerful they are and what they're, because ultimately Thrawn does feel like they are a major threat, not only to the Empire, but also to the Chiss Ascendancy. So, so it'd be interesting to see, where else they would pop up. And that would be pretty neat if they did somehow show up in maybe not Mandalorian, but maybe Ahsoka, I guess, if that's where Thrawn's going to land, stuff like that. So now you wanted to mention something about the first sight again, right? And what this book kind of told us about that.
Well, I mean, the book kind of just flat out explains this is what it's like. And through characters, you can actually see it in action. And at that point, you definitely have no doubt that this is the Force. And it's it's the specific Force gift of sight, foresight.
Yes. Right.
Because the Force, which I find that very interesting, actually, now that I think about it more, is that with the Force, there are specific gifts that each person can have or they can train in. I find it very interesting that the Chiss in general, when it comes to the Force, it's all foresight.
Right.
There are no different branches or other gifts that pop up randomly. It's just... it's an interesting thought, but you learn more about it, you see it in action, and then you can't help but think, surely Thrawn has this too.
Yeah.
But interesting that's the only aspect of the Force that they have access to, if they show any signs of it at all.
Right. So ultimately, I say, it could bring up the conversation eventually is, do they have midichlorians in their blood, right? Because that's how apparently you're able to talk to the Force, right? Speak to the Force. So that would be interesting to know their blood type and what's in their blood. Are they able to do that? And maybe that's what restricts them a little bit is, maybe they don't have midichlorians, but they're able to still somehow tap into the Force.
Yeah.
I just kind of thought of that a little bit because the midichlorians, we've always kind of been told that based on how many you have, that's kind of the level of power you can have, right? Yoda having as much as he does, he's probably the most powerful. And then Anakin, of course, comes and has more than him, and ultimately could be the most powerful. So, one thing I was thinking of, and of course, this would go into revealing a lot about the book, so I don't want to, but I will say this, and I want to see if you agree with me. I feel like the title, Thrawn Treason, actually is not what I expected it to mean. And I think that was part of what I kind of got thrown off with going through the book, right? Because you see the cover, which has the Emperor on it and Thrawn, and I don't know, I think it's misleading a little bit on what that means, right? Did you get that sense?
I totally did. Because looking at the cover, seeing the title, knowing what's happened in the previous books,
right,
it goes one of two ways. And knowing Thrawn, you think it goes one way, and then you get to the end and you're like, wait, reason? I mean, I guess, but it makes sense when you read it, but it's definitely not what you expect.
Yes, totally.
Totally say on it.
yeah, that's all we can say. And again, we're just kind of talking about reasons why maybe the book is not at the highest level that we would say, and that's, to me, that was partially why I was kind of, when I was listening to it the whole time, I'm thinking, okay, where's the tie-in to the title? Oh, okay, well, it's not what that's not what I expected, and it's not, and I don't, it's just, it is what it is.
Yes.
So impact, of course, this is the third book in the whole expanded universe of Star Wars. At this point, we have had Rebels with Thrawn in it, so you don't just have Thrawn in the books; you have him in live action, not live action, animated form. So, in this book impact in there, is there anything in this book or anything that you remember from the book that again impacted your thoughts on any of these characters or the overall storyline of Star Wars?
I mean, I think first off, we learn more about the Chiss, which is always, it's nice to learn more about them and to see it in action, and also confirm a couple of theories that you might have developed beforehand regarding the Force and whether Thrawn has it or not. Also introduces another baddie that you could have sort of loom in the back and then bring to the forefront if needed. I almost wonder if this book served less of a purpose of completing this trilogy than almost being a springboard for the new Thrawn trilogy. The part of you wonders, is this more as a way to like set up and be that gateway in between the two?
Yeah.
And I also think it's good to know that there are limits to the Empire, meaning they can't fund everything.
Right.
So you have different people competing for different projects of what they want funded and why they think theirs deserves that. And so while that does get a bit confusing in the middle, it does show that the Empire isn't necessarily all powerful. So I think the impact it has on the Star Wars universe and timeline is a little more subtle than other books. But I still think it still carries that impact of realization of, yeah, I mean, sure, they're powerful, but they have their limits too.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, because that was one of my thoughts too. Is I think the idea, we knew the idea in Rogue One that it took this long to complete the Death Star, right? And we've heard reasons why, possibly, but we learned that part of it was Galen trying to prolong the build of this thing. But now again, we're getting another reason here with supply lines that were getting thought to be destroyed by these creatures, the Grolloks, and then ultimately there's a different reason. But yeah, we're seeing these flaws in the construction of their weapons and their types of programs and stuff like that, right? So, like you said, it doesn't make it look like they're completely all powerful. They're still restricted by everyday type of problems, right? So, I thought that was interesting details that again kind of impact your thoughts on how these things are done and how these programs are created and stuff like that. So I did love that part of it. I think there was little advancement for Thrawn. It didn't really change my view of him, or it didn't really impact his character that much, and I totally agree with you. I think this did feel more like a setup than a conclusion to this trilogy, right? So I do agree with you there. I think that is a great assessment of that. So, any final thoughts before we get into our rating of this thing?
I mean, read it.
Yeah.
I don't.
You have to finish it. If you're going to do the first two books, you got to do the third book.
I agree with what you said earlier. In my opinion, it's not as good as the two books before it. But read it, because I mean, I have not read the next Thrawn trilogy yet or started read. I have not.
Me neither.
So I can't say, oh, this, like, you got to read this because it fills in X, Y, and Z for this. But especially if we're going to continue the story, do it for that. If anything, you get to learn more about the Chiss. You get to learn a little bit more about the Grisk. And I mean, you get some pretty cool cameos in there too. So
that's right. That's right. All right. So what's your rating of this thing?
It's a 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5.
Yours?
Yeah, I think I believe I rated the other ones higher, right, than 3. So
like both 4s.
4s maybe. Yeah. So I'll go with you. I think 3 out of 5 is a good rating. I think right in the middle is a good rating. I think it's a good one. It's not bad, but it's not as good as the other ones. So, but you know, it is a culmination of this big 3-book arc, and it is definitely worth reading if you're diving into the other ones. It's a good conclusion for certain things, you know. And I think you're right. I think it's going to be some type of springboard into the next trilogy. So I doubt that you have to read this trilogy to get into the next one, but it probably helps a lot with the Chiss, with Eli, with the Grisks, stuff like that, you know. So
completely agree.
Yep. All right. So that is Thrawn Treason, and that is our spoiler-free review on it. If you just now are seeing this for the first time, we have done the other 2 books. So please go to our YouTube channel on the Beyond the Saga playlist. You can get all of our reviews of those stories beyond the Skywalker saga and pick up on Thrawn Alliances, and then Thrawn Treason now. So, as well as our other discussions, right? So, what's, Hannah, a little tease, what's on the horizon for us?
I think we're going to continue going through the Star Wars comics. And also, I think we're going to dive a little bit into Aftermath.
Yes, I love that. I love that mainly because it is around the time period leading up to The Mandalorian. Right? It's kind of setting the stage of what the government's like going into that. And I love it because, you know, I read or listened to those books years ago when they first came out. And I really do want to go back and kind of revisit them, because I don't know if a lot of people really understand how big of an impact those books have in the Star Wars universe, right? Because right now there's this understanding, I feel like with most Star Wars fans still, that the Civil War ended at the Battle of Endor. And it did not. So that's what we're going to dive into mostly, I feel like, with Aftermath is there's a lot of good characters that are introduced in that story, a lot of familiar characters. And it was just very mind-blowing to figure out and hear the things that happened in this series. So I'm looking forward to doing that with you. Yeah,
then that'll be great. And yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
before I go.
And you've read all 3 books, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that's what I thought. All right. So yes, looking forward to that. The Star Wars comic series, the Aftermath series, and who knows, we might throw in a couple things here and there. Who knows?
Why not?
Why not? We love this stuff. All right. Thanks everybody for, of course, watching and listening. You can get this, of course, on all the podcast feeds, or go to YouTube and get all of our playlists. And we just started a brand new series called Masters of the Order, where we are talking to Star Wars creatives that have firsthand knowledge of working on Star Wars projects. The first one up there is Mark Thompson. I don't know if at this point, if I'm going to, I don't know if I released the second interview before this episode. Probably, actually, no. after this. So
So
after this, the second interview is coming, and I've got a couple other interviews already lined up for April, which are going to be very fun to do. So go to the YouTube channel and get that there. Thank you, as always, Hannah, for joining me on this.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. We really appreciate it. Take care. May the Force be with you.